All right, today we're going to try and make sense of the power structure in Iran. It's pretty complex, but using our source material as a guide, we're going to break it down and see exactly how the system works, who holds the power, and how they keep it. So let's get right into it.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? You see headlines, you hear about elections, but it's not always clear who's actually calling the shots. So our goal here is to cut through that confusion and figure out who really holds the power.
So what does our source material tell us? Well, it boils down to this. It's a system built around ultimate power with, and this is the key part, zero accountability. All the authority flows up to the very top, and there are basically no checks and balances to challenge it.
Okay, so let's start at the very, very top of that pyramid and see what this ultimate power actually looks like in practice. And at the absolute peak, you have one person, the supreme leader. This is where the buck stops. I mean, all the major levers of power, we're talking the government, the military, the economy, they all lead back to this one office.
So what does that actually mean, ultimate power?
Well, for starters, the supreme leader isn't elected by the people. He has the final word on literally everything. He's considered above the law, and there's no way to hold him accountable for his decisions. Think about that for a second. This absolute authority, it's really the foundation of the entire system.
Now, you might be thinking, but wait a minute, don't they have elections in Iran? And you're right, they do. They vote for a president, a parliament, but the real question is, how much do those elections really matter if the ultimate power is somewhere else? Let's take a look.
The key here is something called the Guardian Council. You can think of them as, well, as the ultimate gatekeepers. Before anyone can even run for office, they have to get the green light from this council. So what happens is they basically filter out anyone who might rock the boat, leaving voters to choose only from a list of pre-approved candidates.
So if you've got all this power concentrated at the top, how do you keep it? Well, the second pillar our source points to is a pretty massive system designed to control what people say, what they think, and what they know.
First up, brute force. Our source material shows a really consistent and frankly brutal pattern. When people try to protest peacefully in the streets, the response is often incredibly violent. We're talking mass arrests, injuries, and yes, even killings.
And that control isn't just limited to the streets. It's about what you say, too. Simply criticizing the government, just speaking your mind, can land you in prison, or worse. The message is pretty clear. Stay silent. Of course, a huge part of this is controlling the narrative. Independent journalism, it's either severely limited or just not allowed. This pretty much gives the state a monopoly on information, ensuring most people only hear the official story.
And in today's world, there's a really powerful tool for control, the internet kill switch. When major protests kick off, the government has shown it's more than willing to just shut down the internet. This does two things. It paralyzes the protesters' ability to coordinate, and it creates an information blackout, stopping the rest of the world from seeing what's really happening.
Okay, so we've seen the mechanics of power and control, but what does all of this actually feel like for the people living there? What's the real-world impact on society?
Well, the repression is really systematic, and it often targets specific groups. For women, our source points out they're legally treated as second-class citizens. They face all sorts of inequality in things like inheritance or marriage, not to mention the mandatory hijab laws. And then, for minorities, there's a documented pattern of persecution against religious groups like the Baha'is and Sunnis, and ethnic groups like the Kurds and Baluchis. But the list of who's targeted, it just keeps going. The source material shows that basically anyone who could be a source of independent thought is at risk. We're talking journalists, activists, lawyers, students, even artists and environmentalists. And it's also important to note that same-sex relationships are criminalized. The bottom line is, if you step out of line, you're a potential target.
All right, let's talk about the economy. Because as we all know, you can't understand a system like this without following the money. How does it all stay afloat? And where does that money actually end up?
Our source paints a picture of an economy that's just dominated by one major player, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. I mean, its tentacles are everywhere in almost every part of the economy, and it all operates with pretty much zero transparency. On top of that, you've got massive corruption among the elite, you've got economic mismanagement causing huge inflation and unemployment, and then foreign policy decisions that just make international sanctions hit even harder for regular people.
And this is the result, right? It's a tale of two economies. On one side, you have the country's wealth being poured into funding foreign proxy groups and making the connected elites incredibly rich. But for the average person, the reality is widespread poverty and a real lack of opportunity. which is just heartbreaking when you think about how rich in natural resources the country actually is.
So what happens when you put all that together? What do you do if you're young, you're educated, you're ambitious, but you see no future for yourself at home? You leave, and that's exactly what's happening. It's a classic brain drain, with some of the country's best and brightest feeling like they have no choice but to build a life somewhere else.
Okay, so we've looked at the politics, the social control, the economy, and when you step back and look at the whole picture, you start to see this huge fundamental contradiction right at the very heart of the system.
And this quote really nails it. The whole system claims its authority comes from a place of religion and morality. But then you look at the actions, the corruption, the violence, the repression, and they seem to completely contradict the very values the system says it stands for.
And you don't have to look far for evidence of this disconnect. Our source points to a system that runs on fear, surveillance, and even televised forced confessions. You've got a justice system that isn't independent and security forces who can act without consequence. All of this while for decades, people have been risking everything to protest and demand something better.
So, that brings us to our final question, and it's a big one. After looking at the anatomy of this whole system, you have to ask yourself, when a government consistently and for decades ignores the will of its own people, what does that really tell you about the foundation it's built on? We'll leave you with that to think about.